We have seen the basic CRUD functionalities with the console application. With that foundation, I believe it is a good time to switch to the web application and see how we can implement everything with EF Core and much more advanced concept. So we will right click on the web project and set that as the startup project. When we run the web project, right now we do not have anything that is configured. It is simple MVC application with the standard template. So there's nothing on the page, we just have the privacy and the home page. We need to configure everything in web project. Before I do that, when we work with web application, we have to register the DB context in program.cs class file. To configure EF Core to the web project, we need to add that to the services of the container. So there we have the builder. On builder.services, we will be adding a DB context. The implementation of DB context, if we notice in the data access, our application DB context is implementing that DB context. So we need to write the class name here, and that will be application DB context. With that, we have configured our application DB context in the web project. But typically the connection string is never hard-coded like we have done right here. This was only to learn with the console application. With web application, connection string resides in app-settings.json. So here we have to add a connection string. To do that, there is a section with the name of connection strings, and inside there we can give this any name we want. Let me call that default connection. And there we will paste the connection string from use SQL Server. Let me copy that and I will paste it right here. We want to use the same database. If we go back to application DB context, let me comment this out because we are not using that with the web application. In future, when we go back to the console application, we will uncomment that, but we do not need this with the web application. So I will comment and close the application DB context. Now the connection string that we have is in app settings. Where we have configured the DB context, we have to define here that this DB context will be using SQL Server. And on top of that, we need to pass the connection string. We were doing that right here with the use SQL Server. So same thing we have to define in the option. So right here we can configure options. And in there we can say options dot we have use SQL Server inside Microsoft.Entity Framework Core namespace. Here on builder.configuration we have a method getConnectionString. That is a special method. What it will do is it will go to appsettings.json and it will look for the section connection string. If the name is something else, like if you keep it as connection string, it will not work. It has to be exactly the same. As long as it is the same, it will try to find the key value that you define. So in getConnectionString, we want to get the value for default connection. That will retrieve and pass it onto the DB context. Doing this will not be sufficient. If you go to application DB context, you see we overrided the default configuration and there we passed the SQL Server connection. So this onConfiguring was inside the base class. When we create the application DB context in program.cs, we are passing that in option here. We have to pass that on to the base class as well. So in the constructor, we are receiving the DB context option on application builder. So we are receiving the DB context option on application DB context. I will call that as option and we need to pass them to the base class. That will make sure that the connection string is configured inside the DB context, which is the base class, and that is responsible for everything related to Entity Framework Core. And with these changes, Entity Framework Core has been configured in the web application. we had to do quite a few things. Let me walk you through them once again. In app settings, we first added a connection string. That way, when the application is published, app settings will be on the server and it is not hard-coded in the code. Inside the program.cs, we registered that DB context here on application DB context, and we passed the option where we had to pass the connection string. We got that using builder.configuration. We have a helper method getConnectionString, and we passed the name that we have in appsettings.json, which is default connection. Finally, we had to tweak few things in the application DB context. We no longer have to use the onConfiguring. That was for the console application, but the connection string that we receive in constructor, we have to pass that to the base class. So we add this line of code. With that configured, Entity Framework Core is set up to use our web application. Let me continue in the next video where we start using and performing some CRUD operations.